I don't really know how to explain why I went out there in the first place. Maybe it was the stress from work. Maybe I just needed a few days of silence, away from traffic, city lights, and people. I'd done plenty of solo hikes before, but this time I wanted to camp for several days, not just walk. I wanted isolation. No marked trails, no campgrounds, no other tents anywhere near me. Just forest, trees, wind, and dirt. Something about disappearing into a place that barely showed up on a map gave me peace, even if I didn't really know what I was walking into. I chose a patch of forest in the northwest part of the state. It wasn't a national park. It wasn't a state-recognized trail. In fact, it was barely listed as public land at all. Just one of those odd blank green areas you see between logging routes and private hunting land. The only thing I found online was a comment on a hiking forum from someone who said it used to be part of a failed conservation zone in the 1970s. There were no trail markers, no restrooms, nothing. Just a dense patch of woods with a lot of intersecting old fire roads and ATV paths. The satellite map showed enough clearings for me to set up camp and some small streams that looked good for filtering water. I packed my gear carefully. Tent, sleeping bag, tarp, food for 6 days, a water filter, small stove, spare batteries, headlamp, compass, paper map, GPS watch, knife, bear spray, med kit. I loaded everything into my pack the night before and left early in the morning, before sunrise. It took nearly 5 hours of driving to get near the area, and then another hour on a gravel logging road. I parked my car off a shoulder where it couldn't be seen easily from the road. I left a printed itinerary in the glove box, just in case anyone found my car and needed to know where I went. By noon, I was walking. The first few miles were mostly easy. The old fire roads were rough but walkable, overgrown in places but still visible. The forest was thick, mostly pines with patches of maple and birch. The ground was soft with moss and pine needles, and it smelled clean, sharp, and earthy. There were no sounds of cars or planes or people, only birds and the wind, which felt cold and light through the trees. It was exactly what I'd wanted. I hiked for a few hours, checking the GPS and map. I avoided any spots that looked too close to the road or could have other hikers or hunters. I wanted to find a hidden spot deep enough to feel like I was alone in the world. Around 4 p.m., I reached a wide clearing near the bend of a small stream. The grass was flat, the ground was soft but dry, and the stream made a quiet, bubbling sound. There were no signs of other campsites, no trash, no footprints. It felt untouched. I set up the tent, got a fire going, and cooked a small meal of rice and beans. The temperature dropped quickly after sunset, and I pulled on an extra layer and sat by the fire for a while. The first night was calm. There were distant animal sounds, something moving through the brush, a few owls, probably raccoons or deer, but nothing close enough to bother me. I slept well. I woke up just after dawn, filtered water, and made some coffee. I didn't have any big plans. I brought a book and a small journal, and I mostly wanted to rest, sit by the fire, wander a bit, and breathe. I did some exploring in the area, following the stream upstream for about half a mile. There were fallen logs, small muddy patches, and even an old animal skull, probably a deer. I walked carefully, marked a few trees with colored tape so I wouldn't get lost, then made my way back to camp before evening. That second night was different. Around midnight, I woke up. I don't know what made me open my eyes. I hadn't heard anything loud, but something felt off. My tent was cold, and everything was completely silent. Too silent. The kind of silence that feels heavy, almost like a pressure on your ears. No wind, no animal sounds, just total stillness. I lay there, eyes open, listening. I didn't hear footsteps, no voices, no rustling, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. I reached for my flashlight and clicked it on. The beam lit up the inside of the tent. The seams, the folds of the sleeping bag, the gear bag by my feet. Everything looked normal. I waited, flashlight in hand, not moving. I don't know how long I stayed like that, but eventually I fell asleep again. The next morning, the air was warmer, and the forest sounds had returned. I told myself the silence was probably just the wind dying down or a natural lull in activity. I'd experienced quiet nights in the woods before, even ones where it felt weird. I didn't think much of it. I spent the third day relaxing, fishing a little with a line and hook I'd brought, and jotting notes in my journal. But something still felt strange. I kept noticing small things, like the birds never got too close to my camp. They flew around the trees nearby but always seemed to avoid the clearing. Even the squirrels and chipmunks stayed just outside the edge of the open area. It was subtle, but I picked up on it. Then, something else happened. Late that afternoon, while I was collecting wood, I saw something that didn't make sense. About 100 feet away from camp, through the trees, I noticed a patch of the ground that looked wrong. It was flat and smooth, like a perfect square of dirt with no grass, no plants, just bare earth. I walked over to it slowly. The edges of the square were too straight, almost like someone had cut it out with a tool. It was maybe 10 feet wide with compacted, dark dirt. No footprints, no marks, just that perfect square. I looked around and saw nothing else. No tools, no trash, no sign of machines or people. Just that square of dead earth in the middle of untouched forest. I felt uneasy, but I didn't touch it. I backed away slowly and walked back to camp. That night, I moved my tent about 20 feet away from the spot I originally set it. I don't know why, maybe it was dumb, but something about that clearing made me feel exposed. I still lit a fire, cooked, and tried to enjoy the evening. I watched the stars for a while and crawled into my tent just after 10 p.m. I left my boots inside this time, flashlight in hand. I woke up again just after midnight. The silence was back. This time it was worse. Not just quiet, completely dead. I sat up slowly, ears straining. I didn't even hear the stream anymore.
No crickets.
No wind. Nothing. I stayed frozen for a minute, then quietly unzipped the tent flap and peeked out with my flashlight. I swept the beam across the clearing. Then I saw it. Near the edge of the camp, maybe 30 feet away, a small pile of rocks had been stacked. 5 of them, balanced in a thin tower about 2 feet high, that hadn't been there before. I was sure of it. I would have noticed. I looked around, scanned the tree-line, but saw nothing else. Just the trees and that tower of rocks. My heart was pounding. I stepped out, keeping the flashlight steady, walked slowly over to it. The rocks were smooth river stones, not from this area. I hadn't seen stones like that anywhere nearby. Someone had brought them here. I didn't hear anything behind me, but I turned around often, expecting to see someone. Nothing. No movement. No lights. Just the cold, dark clearing and a stack of stones that hadn't existed an hour ago. I knocked them over. I kicked them hard, scattering the rocks across the dirt, then walked backwards to my tent, flashlight aimed at the woods the entire time. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just sat there in the tent, fully dressed, holding the flashlight in one hand and the knife in the other, listening. The silence stayed until dawn. The next morning, everything was loud again. The birds, the stream, even the wind. It was all back, like nothing had happened. But I couldn't shake the feeling. I packed my gear quickly. I hadn't planned to leave that early, but I couldn't stand being there anymore. I knew someone was out there watching, or worse, someone had been near my tent, close enough to build that stack of rocks. That meant they'd been watching me the whole time, and I hadn't seen or heard a single thing. That made my skin crawl. I took a different route back. I didn't want to pass the square of dead ground again, and I wanted to get out faster. I followed the stream until I hit a dirt path, then cut southeast toward the car. It was a longer route, but easier to follow. My GPS watch helped keep me on track. I hiked hard all day, barely stopping, eating on the move. I didn't relax until I saw the edge of the logging road and spotted my car. I didn't notice what was wrong until I got closer. The back tire was flat. Not just flat, slashed. Clean, deep cut right through the rubber. Someone had used a knife or a blade. It wasn't an accident. The other tires were fine. The door was still locked, and nothing inside was missing, but the flat tire was enough. I drove slowly on the rim until I got to a wider turnout, then changed it. I kept checking the woods while I worked, turning every few seconds, heart racing. I didn't see anyone. I got home that night, exhausted, dirty, and shaken. I didn't report it to the police. What would I say? I'm not really sure why I even decided to go camping by myself in the first place. I guess it was something I felt I needed to do. I had just gone through a tough few months. Work had been nonstop. I had been drinking more than I should have, and I felt like I was starting to lose track of my own thoughts. I didn't tell many people, but my anxiety had been getting worse. I needed some space to clear my head. That's what I told myself when I picked a spot up north, far from any towns or cell towers, and packed my gear into the back of my car. The area I chose wasn't marked on many maps, but I had heard about it through an old hiking forum. A user had posted pictures from a trip they took a few years ago. Thick pine forests, clean creeks, high elevation with beautiful cliffs. It was remote, barely traveled, and that made it perfect for what I wanted. A long hike in total quiet, time to reset. I left the house early in the morning, before the sun had even come up. I had my backpack ready the night before with everything I thought I would need. Tent, sleeping bag, dry food, small gas stove, water filter, extra layers, flashlight, compass, maps, first aid kit, and a couple knives. I brought 2 water bottles and a sidearm too, just in case I ran into a bear or something else. The drive took longer than I expected because the dirt road leading up to the trailhead was full of potholes and uneven gravel. I had to go slow and navigate around large rocks that looked like they had tumbled down from the hills above. There weren't any signs or markers, and I didn't see another vehicle the entire time. After about an hour of crawling along that path, I found a small clearing that looked like a good place to park. From there, it was about a 5-mile hike to where I wanted to camp, near a ridge that overlooked a valley. The air smelled like pine and cold dirt. The forest was thick, the ground still damp from rain earlier in the week. There was no wind. Everything felt very still. I loaded up my pack and started the hike in. The first few miles were peaceful. I saw a few deer trails and some squirrels, but not much else. No birds, really. That stuck out to me. Usually you hear them calling to each other, but it was quiet. Too quiet. Still, I brushed it off and kept going. The trail was barely visible. It looked more like a game path than something used by humans. I had to duck under branches and step carefully over roots that crisscrossed the ground like veins. I got to the ridge around mid-afternoon. The sun had started moving low, and the air felt colder up there. The view was worth the effort, though. You could see for miles, thick trees filling every direction. No signs of roads or houses or people. I set up camp a little ways back from the edge where the ground was flat and dry. There was a spot under a group of tall fir trees that looked sheltered enough to block any wind during the night. Once the tent was up, I boiled some water for one of those freeze-dried meals I brought. Tasted like cardboard, but I ate it anyway. I sat on a flat rock and watched the sun sink behind the trees across the valley. The light faded fast, and I could see my own breath by the time it got dark. I put on my thicker jacket, unrolled my sleeping bag, and crawled inside the tent. That night was quiet, too quiet. No wind, no owls, no rustling in the trees. I barely slept. Every little sound made me flinch. Twigs snapping, branches shifting. I kept telling myself it was just the forest settling or small animals moving around, but something about it didn't feel right. It was the kind of silence that makes you feel like you're not alone, even if there's no one in sight. The next morning, I got up with the sun. My body ached from sleeping on the hard ground, and my head felt foggy. I unzipped the tent and looked around. Nothing seemed out of place at first, but then I noticed something strange. A small pile of rocks had been stacked near the edge of the clearing. 3 flat stones, one on top of the other, like a little tower. I hadn't seen it there the day before, and I definitely hadn't built it. It made my stomach turn a little. It wasn't like it was threatening, but it didn't belong. I stared at it for a while, then knocked it over with my boot. The rocks scattered in the dirt. I tried not to think too much of it and spent the rest of the day exploring the area. I walked down to the creek and followed it for a while, filling my bottles with filtered water and trying to enjoy the solitude. But that feeling, the unease, the tightness in my chest, it didn't go away. Later that day, I came back to my camp and found something even more unsettling. My tent had been unzipped. Not all the way, just a few inches. Enough that it was clear someone or something had done it. There were no claw marks or signs of an animal. No footprints either, at least none that I could find. The ground was dry and covered in needles, but I checked carefully. Nothing. I checked my gear. Nothing was missing, but I could feel it. Someone had been there, maybe watching me while I was down by the creek, maybe waiting for me to leave. I thought about packing up and heading back, but it was already late in the afternoon and I didn't want to hike the rough trail in the dark. I decided to stay one more night, but I kept my knife close and didn't sleep much. Every snap in the woods made my heart race. Every time the wind moved through the trees, I thought I heard footsteps. Around 3 a.m., I heard something heavy, not a squirrel or a raccoon. It sounded like a person stepping on dry twigs just outside the tent. I stayed still, holding my breath. I couldn't see anything through the nylon wall, but I could hear it. 2, maybe 3 slow steps, and then silence. I waited for what felt like an hour. My muscles locked up. My mouth went dry. When the sun finally came up, I packed everything as fast as I could. I didn't even eat. I just wanted to get out. The hike back was harder than it had been coming in. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone following me. I didn't hear anything, didn't see anything, but that feeling, that someone was close, just out of sight, it didn't leave me the whole time. When I got to my car, I felt a huge sense of relief. I dropped my pack in the trunk and climbed in. I just sat there for a while, locked the doors and breathed. That's when I saw it. On the hood of the car, a single flat stone, same kind as the ones from that little pile near my tent, just sitting there, right in the center of the hood like it had been placed carefully. I drove out fast, not even stopping to check my phone until I got to a gas station about 40 miles away. No messages, no missed calls, but my mind was racing. That night I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about that stone, about how quiet the forest had been, about the way the tent had been unzipped just slightly. It wasn't a ghost story. It wasn't anything supernatural. It was real. Someone had been out there, watching me, coming close while I slept, leaving little signs that they were near. And the worst part was that they never did anything. They didn't try to take anything, didn't hurt me. They just wanted me to know they were there. And that's what scares me the most. The silence, the waiting, the watching. It's been a few months now. I haven't gone back to the woods since then. I still think about it all the time, though. I'll be brushing my teeth or folding laundry, and I'll remember that sound. The slow, deliberate steps in the dark. I'll remember the stone on my car. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had stayed one more night, if I had ignored the signs again, if I had looked out of the tent when I heard the steps. But I didn't. I left, and I'm still here, for now. I had been meaning to get away from the city for a while. Work had been grinding me down. Waking up to the same gray skies, eating the same food, driving the same roads, and seeing the same tired faces had taken a toll. I needed something that wasn't man-made. I wanted something quiet, something untouched. So I planned a solo camping trip. I didn't pick a known campground. Those were always filled with loud people, generators, and trash. I wanted something more remote. I looked at Google Maps for green areas with no roads or buildings nearby. After hours of scanning, I found a place on the edge of a state forest in the northern part of the state. The spot was near an old rock quarry that hadn't been used in years. I marked it, printed a few topographic maps, packed my gear, and left early on a Thursday morning to avoid weekend crowds. The drive took about 6 hours. The last hour was rough. The road turned to gravel and then to packed dirt, then finally to an overgrown trail that I could only walk. I left my car under some trees where the dirt was dry and flat. From there, I hiked about 3 miles with my pack until I reached the clearing I'd seen on the satellite image. It was better than I'd imagined. The grass was long but soft, with wildflowers poking through in places. The tree line formed a semicircle around it, and the old quarry edge sat off to one side, maybe 30 yards away. The cliff dropped down maybe 40 feet to a dry, rocky pit that was once filled with workers, machines, and noise. Now it was silent. Cracked walls, loose rock, and weeds growing up from the gravel. I set up camp on the higher ground, close to the tree line. My tent was a basic two-man, and I staked it down carefully. There was no cell signal, which was fine. That was part of the plan. I collected fallen wood, built a small fire ring with rocks, and got everything ready for the night. By the time the sun began to dip, I was sitting in my camp chair, eating a simple meal from a pouch, listening to the wind brush through the trees. It was quiet, the good kind of quiet at first. No cars, no people, just birds and wind. I slept fine the first night. The ground was a little uneven, but I'd brought a sleeping pad. The air got colder than I expected, but my sleeping bag handled it. I woke up a few times just from being uncomfortable, but nothing serious. The second day was mostly uneventful. I explored around the edge of the quarry but didn't go down into it. The rock walls were steep, and some areas looked like they could slide if I stepped wrong. I walked along an old path that might have been used for hauling equipment. I found rusted metal, broken concrete, and a thick cable half buried in the dirt, the kind that probably once pulled carts or machines. When I got back to camp, I noticed something weird. The pile of sticks I'd gathered the day before, small branches I planned to use for firewood, looked different. I couldn't explain how exactly, just shifted. Not like they were blown by the wind, more like someone had moved them slightly. The angle of the top stick was off. I stared at it for a while, trying to remember exactly how I'd left it. Maybe I was imagining things. I let it go and got the fire going again. As the sky turned orange and the sun dropped behind the trees, I started feeling uneasy. Nothing specific. No sound.
No smell.
Just a slow, crawling discomfort in my chest. I thought maybe I was just not used to being that alone for that long. That night, I had a harder time sleeping. I kept waking up. Each time I checked my watch. 12:30, then 2:15, then 3:40. At one point, I thought I heard movement outside. Not an animal rustling leaves, but a slow, deliberate crunch, like a foot on dirt. I lay still, holding my breath, listening. Nothing followed. I didn't check outside. I just stayed in my bag until morning. The next morning, I looked around camp. Nothing missing. No tracks. The dirt here was dry, loose. It should have held a footprint if something heavy had stepped. But it looked the same. I decided to hike further out, toward a small ridge to the north. I thought maybe a day hike would shake the nerves. I packed light, just water, a snack, and a knife, and followed an old animal trail. The terrain got rougher, more overgrown. I found what looked like another access point to the quarry from the far side. The slope there was more gradual, with wide gravel patches and rusted barrels half buried in the weeds. Near one of the barrels, I saw something that stopped me cold. A shoe. An old, dirty hiking boot. Faded and sun-bleached, but clearly a left boot. Next to it was a torn scrap of fabric. Dark green nylon, like part of a backpack. I stood there for a long time, staring at the boot. It hadn't been there recently. It looked like it had been there for years, but why would it still be sitting like that? No bones, no remains, no other gear. Just the boot and the scrap. Something about it got under my skin. I backed away, looking over my shoulder more than I should have on the way back. When I got back to camp, I saw something else. A long, thin stick was standing straight up in the ground next to my tent, stabbed into the dirt like a marker. That stick wasn't there when I left. I hadn't seen it before, hadn't blown in. It was deliberately pushed down, about a foot tall, sharp at the end like it was carved. I pulled it out and threw it into the trees. My breathing was shallow. I stood there, frozen, for almost a full minute, just listening. Still no voices, no engine noise, no birds either. That was when I really noticed. The birds had stopped. I packed my gear in a hurry. Tent down, food bag sealed, fire out. I didn't want to be there another night. I had planned 3 nights, but this would be the last one. That final night, I didn't sleep. I lay in the tent, every muscle tense. I didn't even zip the bag shut. I wanted to be able to move. I kept the knife close, along with my flashlight. At around 2 a.m., I heard it again. The slow crunch of a step. Then another. I held my breath. More steps. Closer. Then nothing.
No flashlight. No voices.
I lay there for what felt like an hour. I didn't unzip the tent, didn't look. I just waited. Eventually, I must have passed out from exhaustion, because the next thing I knew, it was light out. When I crawled out of the tent, everything looked the same. Nothing moved, no stick in the ground. But when I went to grab my bag from the tree where I'd hung it, about 10 feet off the ground using a rope, I found the knot undone. The bag was on the ground. The rope was hanging loosely, like someone had carefully untied it instead of chewing or cutting it. The bag hadn't been torn open, but it had been unzipped. One of the pouches was open. I didn't bother checking what was missing. I didn't care. I grabbed the whole thing, shoved it into my pack, and started walking fast back toward the car. I didn't stop to eat, didn't stop to rest, just walked. When I got to the car, the rear window had a smear on it. Not a handprint, just a greasy mark like someone had leaned against it with something dirty. It wasn't there when I left. I got in, locked the doors, started the engine, and drove. I didn't tell anyone about it when I got back. Not at first. I didn't know what to say. I hadn't seen anything. No face, no voice, but something or someone had been out there. 2 weeks later, I looked up that quarry online. It was listed in a forum about abandoned industrial sites. Someone had posted years ago that a man had gone missing in that area while hiking. They found his car, but not his body. That was in the late 90s. He was solo camping, like me. I still don't know if it was someone living out there, hiding, or if it was some kind of trap or territorial warning. But I haven't gone camping alone since, and I never will. I've always loved being alone in the outdoors. It's the one place where I feel completely in control, even though I know it's actually the opposite. I don't go looking for danger, but I don't avoid it either. Maybe that's something I've been ignoring about myself for a long time. I like to test things, not just the outdoors, but myself too. I want to know how far I can go, how much I can take, and if I really know what I'm doing when things get serious. That's how I ended up alone, deep in the mountains of northern Idaho for a weekend camping trip. No reception, no people, just miles of dense woods, wildlife, and silence. I took my car as far up a service road as it would go before the dirt got too steep and broken. I parked just off the side under some trees so it wouldn't be visible from the road. I packed light, one-person tent, a few MREs, water filter, small pot, sleeping bag, sleeping pad, bear spray, knife, flashlight, fire starter, and extra layers. I wore boots that were already broken in and carried a GPS that ran on AA batteries, not one of those apps that go dead with no signal. I also had a paper map of the area in a Ziploc bag. I'd done this plenty of times. This wasn't new to me. The hike up to where I wanted to camp was just under 6 miles. I followed a narrow game trail that slowly climbed through thick lodgepole pine and then opened up near a ridge that overlooked a valley. I set up camp near a rock outcrop, maybe 15 yards from the edge. There was a flat spot with enough dirt for the stakes and a cluster of big trees that blocked the wind. I made sure to set up my bear bag at least 50 feet away and about 12 feet off the ground using a rope and a branch that looked strong enough to hold the food. The first night was uneventful. I made a small fire just to warm up some water and eat one of the MREs. The sky was clear, and the stars looked like they were right on top of me. There was no moon, but my eyes adjusted after a while. It got colder than I expected, but I'd brought the right gear. I slept on and off, waking up now and then from random forest sounds. Nothing strange, just the usual. Small twigs snapping, maybe a deer walking by, maybe even a raccoon or two. I kept the bear spray close just in case. The next morning, I woke up just after sunrise. I made a small pot of instant coffee, warmed up another MRE, and sat on the edge of the outcrop to eat. The valley below was covered in early mist, and it looked like something out of a painting. I didn't have any signal, and I didn't care. That was the point. I stayed at camp most of the day, reading a paperback I brought, walking around the area, and checking the terrain. I didn't go too far, just enough to stretch my legs and get a feel for the place. The forest was quiet. Too quiet maybe, but again, I didn't think much of it. Late that afternoon, I was near a cluster of fallen trees looking for kindling when I noticed something strange about the bark. It looked like it had been shaved or scraped in places. Not claw marks like a bear might leave. These were horizontal, like something had been dragged across the bark. I saw the same thing on 3 different trees, all within 20 feet of each other. There were also some pine cones scattered that looked like they'd been crushed, but not by boots. I didn't see any prints, though. The ground was too dry and hard in that area. I kept looking, thinking maybe it was just the way the bark peeled naturally, but some of the scrapes looked too even, like from metal. That evening I cooked again and tried to forget about it. Trees get weird marks all the time. Maybe someone had camped here years ago and used the bark for fire starting or carving. I made a larger fire since I had gathered a lot of dry stuff, and I sat by it for a while before turning in. It was around 10 p.m. when I finally got into the tent. I had just started to drift off when I heard something heavy moving through the woods. It wasn't small. It wasn't the kind of sound a squirrel or raccoon makes. It was steady, like slow footsteps, and the weight of it made the underbrush crunch deeply. My hand went straight to the bear spray. I stayed frozen for at least a minute, listening. The steps stopped, then nothing, just silence. The kind of silence that feels thick, like the forest is holding its breath. I didn't move. I didn't even unzip the tent to check. After about 10 more minutes, I finally laid back down. I didn't sleep. Morning came, and the first thing I did was check around the camp. There weren't any prints near the tent, but off in the direction where the sound came from, I found a spot where some bushes had been bent and a branch was broken. Again, no clear footprints, just signs that something heavy had passed through. I didn't like it. I'm used to animals being around, but this felt different. Still, I told myself it was probably a moose or elk. They get curious. Could have been nothing. I should have packed up and left that day. I really should have, but I was stubborn. I had one more day planned, and I didn't want to feel like I was running away from something I couldn't even see. I spent that afternoon sharpening the edge of my camp knife and building up a bigger fire ring. I moved the tent closer to a rock wall for some wind protection and maybe even concealment. I don't know why I felt like I needed that, but something about being visible out in the open made me uneasy. That night was worse. I didn't sleep at all. Around midnight, I heard it again. Movement in the trees. Slower this time, closer than before. It circled the camp. I stayed completely still in the tent, holding the bear spray in one hand and the knife in the other. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would give me away. Whatever it was never came all the way to the tent, but it stayed close. At one point, I heard something shift near the fire pit, like a rock being moved. Not kicked, moved. That's what bothered me. Animals knock things around. They don't shift things like they're looking for something. It didn't leave until just before dawn. The steps faded, and the normal sounds of the forest slowly came back. Birds, wind, that feeling of stillness lifted. When I finally got out of the tent, I found the biggest rock from the fire ring had been rolled aside. Not thrown, just rolled a few feet. It wasn't a bear. No scratch marks, no droppings, no torn gear. Nothing else touched. Just the rock moved. That's when I decided I was done. I packed everything up in less than 30 minutes. I didn't even eat breakfast. I didn't care. I got the fire pit doused with water from my bottle, scattered some ash, packed out my trash, and hit the trail back down. I didn't take breaks. I didn't slow down. The forest felt heavier that morning, like it was watching. About halfway back to the car, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There was a boot print, not mine, bigger, wider, and deeper. A man's print. The tread was different than my own. I stopped and looked around. The trail was narrow, and the sides dropped off into thick brush. No one was supposed to be out here. I hadn't seen a single vehicle or hiker in 2 days. I checked my GPS and looked at the map again. I was exactly where I was supposed to be, and there were no other trailheads or campsites nearby. That boot print wasn't old either. It looked fresh. I picked up the pace. I kept checking behind me every few minutes, listening hard for anything that didn't belong. The rest of the trail felt longer than the hike in. When I finally reached my car, I saw that someone had left something on the hood. It was a dead squirrel. His neck broken, no blood, just placed there. clean, on top of the hood right in the middle, like a message. I scanned the area around me, but there was nothing.
No sons, no moviment, no vehicles.
Just my car, the forest, and that dead animal. I didn't touch it. I unlocked the door, threw my pack in, got in, and drove. Fast. I didn't even think about looking back. I didn't stop until I hit pavement again. Once I got into the next town, I pulled over at a gas station and finally let myself calm down. I dumped the rest of the gear from my trunk just to check if anything was missing or messed with. Everything looked the same, but something felt wrong, like I just brushed up against something that wasn't supposed to be seen. Took me weeks to stop thinking about it. I still camp sometimes, but never alone anymore, and never in that part of the mountains again. I still don't know who or what was out there with me. Maybe it was just some messed up hunter, or a squatter living off-grid. But I can't get past the fact that they never showed themselves. They just watched. They didn't take anything, didn't try to scare me off loudly. Just followed me, moved things, left that squirrel. Like it was all a game. That's what keeps me up sometimes. The idea that I was alone out there. But I really wasn't. And whoever was out there with me knew it the whole time. I didn't leave because I saw them. I left because I knew they could have let me see them if they wanted to. But they didn't. They let me leave. And that's what scares me the most.